Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction. The title I didn't choose myself, unfortunately. Otherwise, it probably would have been even longer. But yeah, so my name is Mark van Stiphout. I work in the European Commission in DG Energy, in a unit that deals with all these things. I'm not going to talk about all these things, or maybe actually I do, but I'll try to, let's say, see also how they are linked to what we are discussing here today. So, like I said, it's great to be here. In Aleph Energy, I think we have some kind of implicit cooperation with you or with many of you through the projects that we support through Horizon Europe, and I saw some of them also on the slide that you showed. So I'm basically here to tell you a bit about what we see coming in the energy transition, in the EU, of course, in particular, and why we need you to make that work. So first of all, I assume you have all seen a little bit about the fact that there is a new commission about to start. So we have a President von der Leyen who was confirmed to continue over the summer. Now countries have to nominate persons that will become commissioners, and one of them will deal with energy. Probably one will deal with energy, another one with digitalization, one or a few of them will deal with competitiveness. So there are quite a few of these persons that will be appointed that are very important to us to see how we are actually going to drive what is coming. But with her nomination, the President also presented political guidelines that indicated what her priorities will be for the coming years, and I think the assumption is that the commissioners that will join her will also work on these things. So we have some guidance of what is coming, and of course what is coming is also based on what we see, what is necessary. And I think there are in that guidelines, of course, energy and the climate change is a key thing, confirming 90% greenhouse gas reductions by 2040 is one of the priorities. Another one that is also key is competitiveness. How do we make sure that the Green Deal, the targets, work for society, work for business, basically create jobs and growth in the EU? That's going to be a big chunk of the focus of our work in the coming years. And with that is, of course, also the implementation of all the laws that together form the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package that you may have heard of, that was agreed over the last years, in terms of increasing the share of renewables to 42.5% by 2030, with even the aim to go to 50, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. So all of these laws that go from increasing the share of renewables to making sure that there are enough charging points for electric cars, to promoting the use of heat pumps in buildings and promoting renovation, and also making sure that data is being shared. All of these things are enshrined in a legal text, but they still need to be implemented. The deadlines for implementation were, let's say, last year, this year, and now, of course, we need to see with member states how they're actually going to implement. And this was a huge pact to negotiate, so getting that implemented in a consistent way is going to be a real challenge. And like I said, we have to do that while we make sure that this creates jobs and growth and creates prosperity, let's say wealth, in the EU. And so I think that is where open source as an approach is really important. On the one hand, if we talk about competitiveness, I think it's all about the price that, let's say at least the way we look at it, has very much to do with the price that people pay for energy, and also are we actually manufacturing the things that we need to some extent in the EU. I don't think anybody's talking about creating an island where we just do everything for ourselves, not at all, but we need a diversified, let's say, manufacturing base across the globe, including in the EU, and we would like to avoid that everything is imported from just one place, because that leads to risks, like we have seen, for example, for some relatively silly things like mouth masks in times of corona. So that is one thing, but it's about keeping the prices of the energy transition in check. And of course, there's going to be a huge need for investments, but like Alex said, we cannot just build our way out of the problem, or build, let's say, just build our way into the future, we also need to do things much, much smarter. And we can save a lot of time and money if we do the things smarter. And of course, that is where digitalization comes in. And so when we are implementing all this legislation that is there, and when we are transforming our energy system, we need to make sure that we do it smart in order to keep prices in check, and that requires digitalization. We have, more or less 2 years ago, issued a communication that set out the priorities at EU level for digitalization in energy. We very often talk about the twin transition. We need to digitalize and we need to decarbonize. I don't think anybody disputes that. But then digitalization, like you said, what is it actually, how we're going to do it? It's a lot of different things. And we have looked at where do we really need to act as, let's say, as an institution at the EU level, or where do we need to act as governments. And we have identified 5 things, very briefly. One is data exchange to make a lot of other things possible, to make really essential new ways of working possible. One is, for example, demand response, smart charging, also making renovations cheaper. If banks know better how buildings are used, they can make mortgages cheaper. At least that's our assumption. And so far they haven't disagreed with us. We just need to make it work. And that requires data exchange. We have prioritized smartening the grid, in particular the electricity grid, because we need such a huge electrification, which is going to require huge investments in generation, but also in the networks. And there will be need for more copper, but we also need to make much smarter use of the grid that we have. I once heard a DSO say we are basically designing a grid for 7 days a year when there is a peak capacity. If we can use digitalization to reduce those peaks, we can greatly increase the use of the network and the load factor, so to say. So we use the copper that is there much more effectively. Thirdly, how do we make sure that this also benefits consumers, that it empowers consumers? One key thing here is, for example, energy communities. We are really pushing for citizens to, or for governments to make sure that citizens can join the energy transition, that they can invest in solar panels, electric cars, that there are no hindrances, and that they can organize themselves also at local level to make sure that they make best use of, let's say, everything that they are buying or putting on their roof. And then, of course, there are things that we need to keep in check while we do all this. One is cybersecurity, and the other one is making sure that the energy consumption of the IT sector itself is, on the one hand, kept in check, but is also a driver for investments in renewables. So these 5, data, the grids, the consumers, cybersecurity, and the energy consumption of the IT sector itself, those were the 5 main elements of our action plan, and we are currently discussing and working on the implementation with member states, with network operators, etc. And one of the key things, or 2 of the key things here, are the data and the grids, where I think in particular open source and let's say the things you all work on is very, very important. Data exchange, of course, if things are embedded in open source systems, making the data exchange work is a lot easier than when we start with everything proprietary and we start to see how we make that match. So we are very much in favor of taking, let's say, an open source approach as a baseline. And this, let's say, saying we are in favor, of course, yeah, that's nice to hear, but what do we do about it is the next question. One thing is, of course, that we are setting up a group that is called Data for Energy, where we bring around experts that we will task or ask to design a way to make data exchange work for these specific use cases that we have prioritized, namely demand response, smart charging, and energy efficiency in buildings. So we hope that the open source dimension will very much come into there. And the second way we try to push that is through our research innovation program. So like the title says, we as a unit also are very much involved in Horizon Europe, in designing the program basically, and designing the calls. Not all of them, of course, because it's quite a huge program and there's also a huge amount of people involved. But what we try to push for, at least in some of the calls, is that open source is kind of the basic model to use. In particular, if we're talking about projects or calls that want to support innovation that have a digitalization aspect, we are requiring, or at least suggesting, to use open source. So, of course, if there are core projects that need to find one specific digital solution for something, there may be a point to do things, let's say, proprietary, or to innovate within, let's say, not an open source way. But there are always in these projects lots of different things that are not really the focus of the project, but that require digitalization anyway. And we want to avoid that everybody there just takes whatever comes off the shelf, but that there is a consistent approach to this that promotes also future integration and market uptake of all these innovation projects. And so, like I said, I'm very happy to see that some of the projects that we've been supporting are really, let's say, flagshipping the use of open source. And we see that also those projects are very good in making sure that the way to market uptake is faster. So for us, that's also one of the key things, that we're not investing in research and innovation for the sake of investing in research and innovation. And of course, we like that there is academic excellence in Europe, but that excellence really also needs to lead to innovations that make a difference in the real world and contribute to the energy transition. And we think that projects that use open source have basically a head start when it comes to deployment in the market. The other thing that I want to just mention a bit about is the grids, because the grids are so essential. The electricity grid for starters, and we have, as part of that Digitalization of Energy Action Plan, worked with the network operators, so NSOE and EU DSO, to jointly develop a digital twin of the European electricity grid. That's of course, let's say, a bit of a buzzword, and it can be a huge thing. We don't necessarily feel that we should define what actually the digital twin is, but the key point for us is make sure that the digitalization of the grid goes fast everywhere, and that it's not every TSO or DSO on its own trying to define a solution, trying to think what do we actually need to do, what is the problem, but make sure that there is a consistent approach, that lessons learned, that the innovation spread fast across the community. And of course, network operators are by definition natural monopolies who sit in their area, and they have an important task to make sure that there is security of supply. So if they would get very experimental, and let's say the lights here would go out every 5 minutes for 10 seconds, we also wouldn't be happy. But we think that there is a scope for more cooperation, for a faster drive of digitalization, where the laggards learn from the ones that are ahead, and the ones that are ahead talk to each other to see what are our common challenges. And again, talking to a DSO once who said, when I asked why are you using open source, he said, we don't even really know the solutions that we're going to need in 5 years. So if we now set out projects that have extremely precise terms of reference to say, this is what we need to solve, they will be wrong, because in 5 years the situation will be different and we'll have a solution that we can't use. So for us, open source is the way to jointly innovate, which also makes it easier, because it's not just our responsibility anymore. And that is I'm saying that because I, of course, like hearing that, but I don't think if we ask every DSO in Europe, they will give that answer. But it's a mentality change that I think is needed if we want to go fast with digitalization, and if we want to make sure that the grid is a driving factor in the energy transition and not a hindering factor, which we see that it is too often. And when it's a hindering factor, it's basically capital destruction, because people put solar panels on the roof, or let's say the sun is shining and the electrons go nowhere. And that's a waste of money, and that doesn't help competitiveness. So we have launched this digital twin initiative. Well, let's say the network operators have launched it. They signed an MOU. They have a joint task force. So that's great. I would like you all to work with them or talk to them and see that the open source becomes a baseline of that cooperation. We have the Twin EU, a major flagship project in Horizon Europe, where also some of you, or maybe many of you, are involved, where I hope also open source is one of the key things, because we really think that for the, let's say, the cooperative approach for the grids, that type of open source mentality, so to say, is really needed. And I'm focusing now on the electricity grid. In the action plan, we focused on the electricity grid, but of course we're seeing now and looking, ending where I started with the political guidelines of Ursula von der Leyen. The next big challenge is the decarbonization of the energy-intensive industry, and it's going to get really hard. It's not going to be just electrification, but it's going to be an integrated approach to infrastructure. For example, if you look at industrial areas, how can we optimize the different flows of energy, the different flows of data, to make sure that that transition of the energy-intensive industry works in a way that keeps them competitive and again goes as fast as we can. So it's electricity grids the focus now, but it will very soon also become things about heat, or actually it already is, heat, CO2, hydrogen, maybe some gas here and there, but then you can basically involve it in your models just to see how we can phase it out as fast as possible. So I really would like to end this thing with a plea. First of all, with a compliment to say that you're all here discussing energy in terms of open source and not discussing things like how do we make better advertising through TikTok or whatever. So that's already a big thank you for being here. Now go out and make sure that everybody knows what you're doing, in particular when we talk about the energy transition and how we need to digitalize the grids. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to a nice conference.